Boa noite, pessoal. Bem-vindo ao Future of Money, o maior evento sobre o futuro do dinheiro da América Latina. A gente está aqui para discutir como as novas tecnologias vão mudar a forma como você gasta, recebe, investe e usa o seu dinheiro. A gente está promovendo uma série de eventos ao longo de todo o mês de novembro, falando sobre os temas relevantes que estão no mercado hoje. Estamos falando de Pix, blockchain, criptomoedas, Open Banking, segurança cibernética e por aí vai. Quero lembrar, para quem quiser fazer pergunta, é só botar no nosso canal e que esses painéis ficam gravados no canal do YouTube na Exame. Se você tem algum amigo, alguém que você acha que possa ter interesse pelo conteúdo, é só fazer um share com ele, mandar, porque a gente está trazendo um conteúdo muito bacana aqui, muitos de forma inédita. Hoje eu tenho um grande prazer de ter pela primeira vez para uma audiência brasileira, o Tyler e o Cameron Winklevoss. Eles são mais conhecidos por terem criado a rede social que deu origem, ou que pelo menos inspirou a formação do Facebook, mas, na verdade, as atividades dele no meio financeiro são muito mais interessantes. Eles são investidores em Bitcoin desde 2012, fundaram a Gemini, que é uma bolsa e uma custodiante de Bitcoin em 2015, e são um dos grandes promotores da regulação para esse mercado, principalmente nos Estados Unidos. Além disso, são atletas olímpicos, competiram no remo na Olimpíada de Beijing. Então, assim, a gente está trazendo aqui gente da maior qualidade para vocês. Tyler and Cameron, I will switch to English right now. Thank you very much for being here with us. And I guess maybe the first time speaking for a Brazilian audience, right? So again, thank you very much. I did a brief introduction regarding some of the things that you build. Mention also that you guys are Olympic athletes, which is not a small thing, right? So again, thank you very much for being here with us today. Do you like to give some open remarks, introduce yourselves, or should we jump right in?
Well, thanks for having us. Thanks for having us, yes.
We're happy to jump right in.
What do you think, Cameron? No, let's move. I will start with a very, very simple question, okay? Why Bitcoin? You guys are maybe not early stage, but you are guys jump into this in the beginning. So why Bitcoin? Right? What drove you guys for that?
So when we came across Bitcoin, we recognized that it was the first money in the world that was ever created specifically for the internet. And that sounds like a weird statement maybe because we had things like PayPal, but PayPal really skinned the current banking system and enabled it on the internet, whereas Bitcoin works the same way your email works. So all of a sudden money now works on the internet the way it could. And that's a big deal. Bitcoin happens to be, we think, gold 2.0 and have those characteristics of gold. So it's really like, we think of it as like internet gold or gold 2.0. But effectively, why it's gold 2.0 is because it has a fixed supply. There will only be 21 million Bitcoin ever created. And even the supply of gold is actually unknown. Gold is scarce, so we think of it as precious. But as technology increases or demand increases, the supply of gold that's actually mined increases. Whereas Bitcoin, no matter what technological breakthroughs happen, similar to what happened in oil and gas with fracking, that can't happen in Bitcoin because the algorithm and the math and the network all agreed that there's only going to be so much Bitcoin. So if you think of, it's gold, but it's actually better at being gold than gold because you can send it like an email. It's hard to send gold. It's not as portable. It's not as divisible. Bitcoin, you can buy 100 millionth of it. So you can divide one Bitcoin into 100 million pieces. So it has the same qualities that we think make gold valuable, but it's actually better. And it's built for the internet. You can send around like emails. So we thought that was a really big idea. That captured our imagination back in 2012. And we started buying back then when Bitcoin was in the high single digit US dollars value.
Yeah. And regarding that, these properties that we compare a lot about, like gold, was that your vision since the beginning, or in the beginning you were thinking more like a currency or something like that?
So we found the the gold thesis pretty quickly. I mean, I think the software elements of Bitcoin make it sort of near money. Like you can use Bitcoin to pay for things, and it moves much better than actual fiat dollars. But I think the gold framework is something we found early on and have really kind of held on to for the better part, since we've been in the last 8 years or so. And we actually recently wrote a piece this summer, a blog post, where we predict the price of Bitcoin could reach as high as $500,000 a coin based on the market capitalization of gold. So today, I think the market capitalization of Bitcoin is around 320 billion or 330 billion, and gold is at least 9 trillion above ground gold. So we think that Bitcoin overtakes gold, and in order to do that, it has to go up at least 45 times from today's price. So it might look like $17,000 Bitcoin is expensive, but we actually think it's a bargain.
Yeah, and I think the gold framework's important because a lot of people look, it's not being used as a currency, and frankly, it's very hard to be a great currency and a store of value. So when you think about, like, no one's complaining that gold is not spent. You don't buy a cup of coffee with gold. It really sits in vaults. It's a store of value. It's a hedge to government currency inflations, to money printing, to mismanagement of a government currency. That's what gold's role is. So early on, we saw Bitcoin wasn't being used. It was volatile. So what is the value? And so you easily find your way into the gold framework. And so I think that was important for us to say, like, hey, people call this a digital currency or a cryptocurrency. It's actually, it can be used as a currency. Like gold can be used as a currency. And before the invention of fiat currency, gold was its commodity money. You'd go to the market and use gold, and then people decided to, invent fiat currency that was pegged to gold, and then unpeg it to gold. So, I think the sort of value framework is important to us, and also it helps explain why it doesn't really matter, and it's very hard for it to also be a currency, and it still can be worth $9 trillion like gold, without you having to see it being spent a lot.
Yeah, and money actually provides a lot of functions, right? From store of value for like accounting methods, from transactions, right? So yeah, you're totally right. And then, guys, coming to my second question. So you discovered Bitcoin, you did your research or started buying. Why Gemini? I mean, you can be easily comfortable as just like a Bitcoin investors and or invested in companies. Why build Gemini in 2015?
So the simple answer is that we bought a lot of our early Bitcoin in the Wild West, and it was a very risky endeavor. We used an exchange called Mt. Gox, which stands for Magic, the Online Gathering Exchange. It was a magic card exchange that pivoted into becoming a Bitcoin exchange, and it was run by two Frenchmen in Tokyo, and that was like 90% of the Bitcoin market in price discovery, and the exchange had no license.
Yeah, magic in the name of something that you buy, it's not exactly a good thing to hear, right?
Right. So we ended up buying a lot of Bitcoin on Mt. Gox. Luckily, we removed it and we created our own storage system ourselves. But that exchange famously imploded and took a lot of value with it. And so we had all this Bitcoin and we were very motivated to buy it and store it. But we felt like if Bitcoin's going to go mainstream, there needs to be sort of regulated, licensed on-ramps. Otherwise, the Bitcoin that we own, it will just be this fringe technology. It won't really fulfill the promise that we think it can and should. So we looked around at investing in different exchanges and projects, and most people were tackling it from like a technology standpoint, but not really looking at the licensing and compliance aspects.
Yeah.
So New York State started to look at Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and decided they wanted to regulate it. We were in New York at the time. We applied for a New York Trust Company license, a very robust banking charter. We received that in 2015 in October and launched Gemini shortly thereafter. So we've been live for about 5 years. And I think ultimately we're builders at heart. We love building new things and companies. We first started to try and build a social network in college. Maybe you saw the movie The Social Network. Didn't quite end up the way we had hoped. We went to investing for a period of time and then found sort of this passion with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and said, hey, this is a company I think we should really build. It's exciting, and the world really kind of needs this kind of platform.
Yeah. Guys, I'm going to ask a question right now that I'm sure you guys answered like thousands of times since the beginning, but I got to do it anyway, because we have some people that are versed in cryptocurrency in our audience, but there's also a lot of people who are beginning to understand. So I think it's worth to do this again. Can you explain a little bit for like non-versed people the case for cryptocurrencies and for Bitcoin? You touch a little bit when you talk about gold, but can you talk a little bit more about these internet of value and how this can really change the way that we do our regular day-to-day interactions with money and value?
Sure. So I think a good anecdote would be try to get money from Brazil to London, fiat money, on a Friday night. So the fastest way to actually do that today, outside of cryptocurrency, would be to board a plane in Sao Paulo maybe and fly the flight overnight to London with a bag of cash, and then your money would arrive. If you try and send a wire, it won't get there if it's after 5 o'clock on a Friday after banking hours. It won't get there till at least Monday, maybe Tuesday if there's a holiday, a bank holiday in London. So you're talking about moving cash around, takes 4 or 5 days. And that's if you're in the banking system. So when you juxtapose that, that's if you have permission, you can open a bank account, which many people in the world can't do. When you juxtapose that to how email works, it's 24/7, 365, it never shuts down. Now, maybe we'd like our email to go back to banking hours because we get more free time, but it would be kind of ridiculous if email shut down. And that's the way money works right now. It is not global. You can't send like small amounts like micropayments on the internet. You can't send less than $1 wire transfer. It's too costly. It's expensive. It's slow. It's not global. I use an example, Brazil to London. If I use an example of trying to send cash from Brazil to Sri Lanka, who knows how long that would be? Who knows how much that would cost? Who knows if it would ever get there? And it's kind of ridiculous in 2020 when the internet's been around for 30 years and we know that money is just information. And we can't move our money around by the current system because the current system was built before the internet. It doesn't know how to work on it. And so that is really the promise of cryptocurrency, largely in the sense that like, if money is the lubricant of trade and allows us to interact and be a global, economy that are all interconnected, our money has to get a lot better. But that's just sort of the beginning. You can create all of these interesting financial applications on blockchains like Ethereum, where people don't need permission from a bank to get a bank account. They don't necessarily need permission from their government to send money to something, to lend some of their ether, to lend some of their cryptocurrency. And so the promise of everybody in the world with a smartphone all of a sudden has a bank account in their hand, and they can make their own financial decisions, especially if they live in an authoritarian regime where there's strict capital controls, Or maybe you live in Zimbabwe where the local currency has been so debased that you want to put your value somewhere else. So we use this sort of the term bankless, like this idea that you can kind of become your own bank, the way that Twitter allowed you to become your own broadcaster, or you can create a podcast in your basement and like Joe Rogan and maybe sell it for $100 million. You don't have to get hired by a company, rise up the ranks. So it's sort of like, in a nutshell, it really empowers the individual because it decentralizes money, which has very much been a centralized thing that requires a lot of permission. And if you're, and you know, so I think those are the larger themes of like why we think this is so important as the personal computer, or even the printing press, or the invention of the early internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had this problem to explain for people at the bank also, and I do some analogies with that. I mean, Brazilian have a very robust payment system, right? We're just starting this week a new payment system run by the central bank that basically allow for you to do instantaneous transactions at 24/7, okay? Which is a very unique. But the analogy that I use is that, okay, imagine that this system, that the name is PIX, P-I-X, it's global, okay? And in that case, without a central banking controlling everything, okay? That's the potential of a global network of cryptocurrencies. So for Brazil, I think it's easier to understand. And guys, you were very vocal since the beginning about the need of regulation, okay? Last year, if I'm not wrong, you did a campaign that said like a revolution needs rules, right? And that, in my view, came a little bit like in opposite direction of some of the more libertarian people that begin with like Bitcoin cryptocurrencies. What is the importance of having regulation for this industry?
So it's a great question. And I think that, obviously regulation is a spectrum. We believe in healthy regulation because we think the most vibrant markets in the world have thoughtful and healthy regulation. We've experienced the Wild West in Bitcoin. We've seen a lot of people get harmed through hacks of unregulated exchanges and things like that. So we think it's really important, especially since this is a new asset class, to build trust. And so that when people come to a place like Gemini, they understand that they're working with a financial institution, just like a brokerage account or another bank account that they would normally open. We thought that's very important because the technology can kind of be scary, and we want to demystify it and remove as many variables as possible in that. So we think that the technology is really about individual empowerment and decentralization, but we need a level of regulation to build trust and make sure that consumers are protected in this new market. So that was the general idea. It's very easy to sort of talk about disruption and overthrowing this system and that system, but what about the rules? And when we look at some of the most important rule sets in the world, we look at the United States Constitution. It's a very important rule set, and it's worked for about over 250 years to create a really wonderful thing, a country that has really thrived based on that rule set. The Bitcoin source code is another rule set which governs the protocol, but we also need to have rule sets that help companies like Gemini and how we operate to make sure that we're doing what we say we do. We obviously put the customer first regardless of the regulation, but the regulation is a nice thing to have so that we can have conversations with you and your bank and other banks around the world and open up accounts and build into the mainland of finance. So there's obviously some exchanges that don't believe in that, and that's fine. We just don't think that's a very big market long term. We want to really cater to both individuals and also institutions. So we think that's very important, and that's where we want to be.
And that's just to clarify one thing is and regulating the companies that hold people's value, right, is very different than regulating Bitcoin, the protocol. So people can come to Gemini and realize we hold their private keys, we hold their Bitcoin, and we're regulated. But they can also withdraw their Bitcoin off Gemini into a Trezor wallet that they hold or somewhere else. So when we say regulation, we really mean the companies built on top of it that hold a tremendous amount of value. Need to be doing things the right way. But like Cameron said, it's a spectrum. There's really bad regulation. Some areas there's no regulation at all, which is frustrating because we can't get a license, and then we can't build a relationship with the financial institution to get a bank account. So it's an
Here's a perfect example. If you look at what's happening with social media right now, when social media first came about in Web 2.0 in the early 2000s, when it started to become a thing, people didn't realize that their data was valuable and that privacy online was a very important thing. And so there was no regulation. It's non-existent. And we've run into all these problems because there's sort of no rule set or standards in how you treat customers' privacy, how you behave and things like that. And we're now building it 15 years after the fact on some level, and it's just not going to be as good. And a lot of people are upset. And so we think that it's important to have those things from the get-go, that foundation to build trust, because social media in many ways has lost a tremendous amount of trust and people are very exhausted and upset with it.
Yeah, interesting. And do you see, because again, there's a lot of people that talk about not your key, not your money, right? But when you guys, your view about regulation, that actually needs to regulate the companies that work and are building things into these industry, right? Do you see a way that, because most people in their day-to-day lives, they don't want to have all the troubles and worries, to know your private keys and so on. So do you see this happening? We're having mass adoption without having companies like Gemini building reliable solutions and good experience for the end consumer?
I think you said it well. Most people they want convenience and ease of use. They want something simple. So when they go to buy gold, for example, they generally buy it in an ETF. Most people don't actually buy bars of gold because then you have to store it in a safe and deal with all that overhead and headaches. So they say, well, look, I want exposure to gold. And I'll buy it through a fund or an ETF or something like that, some kind of product that wraps the physical commodity. But there are people who want to actually own bars of gold. And the great thing about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is you can store it on Gemini or you can store it in your own private wallet. There's a spectrum of how you can handle private keys and the storage. I think the vast majority of people will say, look, I just want to store my value at a regulated financial institution like Gemini.
Yeah. Go on, Tyler.
I was just going to say, if we look to email, for instance, I think Gmail was a major application in mainstreaming email, making it easy. But you could sort of say, not your servers, not your emails. Which is true because you're actually trusting Google to run your email, right? And you have to trust one party. And the overhead and the brain damage of running your own email servers in your basement in your house tends to, for most people, not be worth it. They're just not hiding that many secrets. But like I said, with Gemini, you can always withdraw your Bitcoin off. If you decide, hey, I actually want to get more I want to do this myself and sort of own my private keys, then you can do that. But I think for most people, reliability, simple, easy to use, something they can trust, that convenience factor is worth doing it all themselves. So, we think that's important, and that's been important in many industries historically in technology. So, we're here to provide that option, but for some people, they may want a different option.
Yeah. And people need somebody to sue as well, right? If something doesn't go fine. Sure. Yeah, it's an important part of the puzzle. Switching a little bit for markets and prices. we had these like spectacular, I would call bubble in the late 17 and beginning of 18. Okay, then price went from around $20,000 per Bitcoin to, I don't know, 3,000 something. But since then, we are steadily recovering, right? And in my perspective, in a different way that what happened in 2017 and 18. How do you guys see these recent price moves, especially in terms of retail and institutional adoption? What is different from this trend right now from what we had 2 years ago?
So yeah, in 2017, about 3 years ago, Bitcoin hit an all-time high of around $20,000. And a lot of that was driven by retail speculation. There was definitely a sort of a mania. People got really excited about Bitcoin. And I liken it a lot to the dot-com bubble that burst in the late 90s. And people thought, oh, tech is dead, it's over. But actually, some of the greatest companies in the world emerged from that, including PayPal and including Amazon. And in the wake of that, a lot of new companies like Facebook started building and became that next generation. And over the past 3 years, it's very much been a rebuilding year for Bitcoin and really the entire industry. Gemini has grown from about 100 people to about 350 employees. We now have offices in London and Singapore. We're looking to enter the Brazilian market. We've done a ton of work to improve our product and also our reach. We're also seeing the growth of lending and borrow markets, derivative markets, and all kinds of new projects and things. So it's a much more mature ecosystem today than it was 3 years ago, and it's cheaper Bitcoin. So again, I go back to my point that it's a bargain, I think, at today's prices in many ways. What's also happened is we've had a major pandemic, global pandemic, and the US government in particular has printed about $3 trillion in the past 6 months or so. And there's likely more stimulus to come. That's added on top of an existing $27 trillion deficit. $1 trillion. And that deficit has grown every year since the last financial crisis, even when the crisis was over. And what's become pretty clear is that the US government in particular is very addicted to printing money to service all these costs and pay for the operation of the government. And that just is sort of continuing. And I think people are seeing this money printing and they're saying, wait a second, this is not going to work. The math won't add up. At some point, you can't kick the can down the road. You can't keep doing that. And when that happens, there's going to be this debt reckoning. And the US government is comparatively well managed in comparison to other fiat currencies. And it's benefited from arguably good management over the past, couple decades and the creditworthiness. But there's a lot of sort of problems. There's this layer of debt cake. The GDP to debt ratio, I think, is at 135% right now, incredibly high levels. And so people are saying, well, wait a second. Okay, it looks like the scourge of inflation, it's sitting out there. It's coming. It's going to happen. What do people usually do? Well, 10 years ago, your option or main option is to either be in the market or a real asset that's going to get priced up with inflation, or gold. Gold is like the classic inflation hedge. And what you're going to see, central banks are already doing that. I think they're binging on gold. They're buying more gold now than they have since like the 60s. I think Germany just loaded up on a bunch. So if you don't sort of look at what the central banks say, look at what they do, and they're all buying gold because that's the sort of the muscle memory they know. That's what they do when they see inflation. They haven't built the Bitcoin flow yet. But many hedge funds and high net worth people like Paul Tudor Jones, Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy, they're going to Bitcoin because they see it as an emergent store of value that not only will protect their value, but might actually overtake gold and have kind of huge upside because of its nascent nature and because of its digital nature. there's billions of people around the world who could actually get a piece of Bitcoin and buy some Bitcoin, but they may not have access to gold, or owning gold may not be super feasible. They'd rather actually own this software hard money. And so the pandemic has sort of accelerated people kind of finding Bitcoin and understanding, wait a second, this is an incredibly amazing emergent store of value. It's really interesting. And it really comes in the backdrop of all of this debt that's been piling up in the Western world. And quite frankly, I'd say the many economies around the world. And I think, just to put it a little more in perspective, and then I'll stop because I've been saying a lot, there's 40.6 million millionaires in the world. There's only 21 million Bitcoin in the world. There's not enough Bitcoin per millionaire to go around. And so people are sort of going to understand that, like, the fixed aspect of Bitcoin is incredibly important and powerful.
I like that analogy. I didn't hear that. Let me, I mean, we are reaching our time limit here, guys, but I want to follow this reasoning and add another question that AJ Ovalle is asking here. And also that would be one of my questions as well. It's what are the challenges that you see for Bitcoin in the next 3 to 5 years? A lot of people talk about like energy usage and things of that sort. What are the challenges, especially if more people starting to jump in?
Well, the infrastructure, I mean, we haven't really been tested as an ecosystem heavily for 3 years. So we don't know what the new load will be when people really start to pile in. We've been hard at work building our infrastructure, our servers, our exchange, and all that stuff, and revamping it. But you don't know until you really experience it on some level. So that is a risk that we're just, we're not ready as an industry to absorb all of that interest. That's one risk. Education is always a risk. And we're always constantly educating people about the benefits, and also demystifying. I think a lot of times people think Bitcoin is anonymous and it's used only by bad actors. And so we spend time working with regulators, banks, partners, and people, even our advertising campaigns, trying to explain the benefits and dispel some of the myths around crypto. And I think, I don't know, Tyler, if you have anything more to add there in terms of risks going forward. I think that Bitcoin is open source code, so it can upgrade and evolve. If there's like a security issue around, for example, a lot of times people talk about quantum computing. Would it break the Bitcoin algorithm? Well, the answer, we believe, is that the Bitcoin source code would simply upgrade to a quantum resistant algorithm, which already exists. So it can evolve to the changing environment, and that gives us a lot of comfort that you don't have to really know the future, other than there's a lot of strong, people in the community who we think will find solutions if and when problems arise.
Yeah, I think the risk is not owning Bitcoin, frankly.
Not owning it.
Yeah, it's sitting on the sidelines is the big risk.
Just as a joke, there are some people that works with me here that I ask every morning, did you buy some? No, and then, okay, so we have nothing, right? Guys, we are reaching our time limit. Again, I would like to thank you very much for being here today with us. Congratulations for all the work you've done in the field and for what you are building. I hope there will be a lot of things that we will do in the future. And again, thank you very much, not only in my name, but in the name of everybody that is watching us. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you very much.
And you want to jump in the end, please feel free.
Yeah, no, we're very excited. Thanks for having us, and we're really excited. We will be entering the Brazilian market. We don't have a firm date right now, but we look forward to working together and entering the market, both for retail individuals and also institutional customers. So we're very excited. It will be our sort of first foray into South America. So we're very excited about that.
That's great. Breaking news.
Also, we're on Twitter, so if you want to message us, I know we didn't get to some of the questions, so our DMs are open, so drop us a line and we'll get back to you. Thanks for having us, everyone.
Bye, bye, guys. Take care. Obrigado por todo mundo.